Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, oceanographer, National Geographic explorer, ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this,
Our
this
show.
adventure.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community. We're glad to be back and hope everyone has made some time to get outdoors. Today is also Giving Tuesday, so please consider a donation to your favorite ocean charity.
And as founder of Mission Blue, I just have to say, here we are.
Oh, there's one choice, yes. So I'm going to start my screen share.
And National Geographic.
Yes. Here we go.
Lots of blue organizations out there.
There are many blue organizations out there.
Everyone needs your help because they help the ocean. Keeps us alive.
Yes, it does. And I wanted to say that as we get through the conversation today, you can put your questions in the Q&A box and we will get to them towards the end of the program. And before we get underway here, we want to remind everyone that
the world is blue.
Oh, wait a minute. There we go. So last time we had a great introduction to nudibranchs with Rebecca Johnson and how she was using iNaturalist to look at nudibranchs here along the California coast. But today we're diving in deeper with the nudibranchs in November with our special guest, Dr. Terry Gosliner. Terry, if you could turn on your video and camera.
Oh, there
Microphone.
he is.
There he is.
Great. Thank you, Liz and Sylvia. Great to be here.
We're so pleased.
The big mollusk.
The big mollusk is among us. It's with us. So you've just come back from some polar expeditions. Did you find any nudibranchs there?
I did not, but in the Antarctic, they're not in the shallow water because of all of the anchor ice and the scraping that goes on in shallow water. You find them usually down below 100 feet or so. You really start finding nudibranchs in the Antarctic. And over the years, I did a lot of cold water diving in my youth, and I found that warmer is better.
Well, and by when we'll get a submersible for you, then we'll go nudibranch.
That sounds good.
Searching.
All
Yeah.
right. It's a deal.
And you've been at the Academy of Sciences, California Academy of Sciences, since 1982. So since even when I was still a volunteer there, looking at nudibranchs and sea slugs and their evolutionary roots. And you've been particularly focused on the nudibranchs of the Philippines and kind of one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world.
Not just for nudibranchs, but for whole
Systems.
a lot of marine creatures and on the land as well, historically at least. Yeah.
And the Academy of Sciences is among one of the, I guess, kind of the handful of institutions that really focus on this, looking at biodiversity. Is that the case, Terry?
Yeah, in the sense of documenting new biodiversity and establishing historical trends based on the vast collections that museums have. And those historical collections really provide the benchmark by which we can measure change.
Well, that census of marine life that took place from 2000 to 2010 dived into the records of these institutions that you're showing here, trying to figure out what already is known about life in the sea and what historically those records of who existed where. Some of them don't exist there anymore. New species have come, fill the gaps, and it was fascinating.
Well, I think as long as we've been doing this, we still know about only 10% of the life that inhabits the world's oceans. And with regard to, for example, the nudibranchs that I study in the Philippines, about 54% of the species that we find there are undocumented scientifically. And so there's still lots and lots of fundamental work to be done, and understanding how those organisms function in a larger ecosystem and in a coral reef community. And that nudibranchs, I put this in to remind people that nudibranchs are mollusks. They're in the group of snails and slugs, and they've become very clever in that they don't have to build a shell for protection like most mollusks, that they moved into a chemical world where they obtain toxic chemicals from their prey to protect themselves. And so building an expensive and bulky shell is no longer something that they need to do in their lifestyle.
That's why they're called nudibranchs.
Yes, that means naked gills.
Good gills, yes.
Yes.
Very
And a lot of people get confused about that. And I have a license plate frame on my car that says I'd rather be nudibranching, and people often will sort of knock on their window when I'm stopped at a stoplight and ask me what nudibranching is. And I said, is that like nude sunbathing? And, you know, but
just your gills.
it's just, you know, letting our gills be free, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some hats in our shop that say slug life on them with a nudibranch, and people are similar. What is a nudibranch? You know, what is that thing? But here they are.
Goodness.
Just look
Yeah,
up.
and this just gives you a little taste of what some of the diversity of body form is. And, you know, unlike a lot of the snails that have shells that are really constrained in how they put together their bodies, they have a lot more flexibility in terms of the kinds of appendages they have, the you know, that some of them can store the stinging nematocysts from their prey and use them for their own defense, that they can sequester toxic chemicals. There's lots of strategies that you find that are unique to this remarkable group of organisms.
Aren't some of them actually green because they have borrowed chloroplasts? Or
That's absolutely correct. So and some of them are able to really farm those chloroplasts and may only feed as juveniles, and then can basically live out their entire life just on the photosynthetic products of those chloroplasts. Pretty remarkable.
It's really
to
remarkable,
be self-contained. I mean,
Yeah.
imagine if people could do that.
right?
Wouldn't be quite as interesting, but
Yeah. Yeah. We'd have to give up Thanksgiving, which
Yeah.
and ice
right
cream.
now doesn't seem like a bad idea.
No.
Oh, you know, you think birds are colorful and butterflies, but look at these little guys.
Yeah, and you know, birds in particular are colorful because they're sending messages to the members of their own species, whereas nudibranchs are really sending messages to potential predators that they're distasteful, much like a lot of butterflies. You know, things like monarchs that feed on toxic milkweed and are sequestering the chemicals. This is the marine equivalent of what you see in terms of aposematic or warning coloration in the nudibranchs.
You need to get a life list of nudibranchs, like the
Yeah.
life of birds.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have one for myself.
Bet you do. How many are there?
Well, there are about 3,000 that are named, and probably at least double or triple that are still not named.
Yeah. I think somebody named a nudibranch after you, didn't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. In the Chilean fjords,
Yeah,
little Chile in Chile.
it is.
Look at,
So, you know, we can study nudibranchs to understand evolution, for conservation, and basically understanding their biodiversity, because they feed on so many different kinds of prey, depending on what species they are. They're really good indicators of ecosystem health. And if there are a lot of nudibranchs, then you probably have a very healthy, thriving, diverse ecosystem.
I'll look at the face on this one down in the lower corner. It's just-
Yeah, listen,
Little green here.
that's one feeding on another one in the
Okay.
Galapagos, and these were some that we documented. The Galapagos had been studied fairly well for nudibranchs, but in the early 1990s, we had a week-long expedition that John McCosker organized with Paul Human, and we found 40 species of nudibranchs that had not been found in the Galapagos before, including lots of new species. So
Incredible.
You call
Yeah.
them new species, but they've been there all along.
yes, they're new to us.
New to us.
Yeah.
Nude to us, yes.
Yeah.
It's just great to see them out there, and then this is sort of that typical field craft here, the little zodiac or
Yeah,
some sort, and it really does.
You're having
Speak
too much
to-
fun.
Yeah, but I mean, oftentimes you can just find nudibranchs even just by snorkeling. You don't always have to be diving.
oh yeah, and you can find them in local tide pools. I'm sure Rebecca talked about that in terms of
Yeah.
the diversity in documenting things here on the California coast.
Yeah, we talked about that, and finding the lemon peel in the tide pool is so exciting for people, and some of the other ones that are up in the shallow water.
It's a treasure hunt.
But yeah, it's one of the things that I think almost anyone can participate in, going out and looking for nudibranchs. And
Yeah, and in fact, so many of the new species that have been recently discovered are by local dive guides, by photographers, and I get emails almost every day where somebody sends me a photo of a new species that they've found somewhere around the planet, and it's never dull. There's so much still to discover, and everybody can be a discoverer and can participate in that process of building that understanding and of the diversity of life on the planet and in the oceans in particular.
I can hear some crusty CEO saying, well, what good are they?
Yeah, and I've heard those same people, and there's obviously some really good answers to that, and if we think about basically how nudibranchs are important, they're biomedically important. There are several natural products that they produce that are where drugs have been developed using those unique chemicals that are now used in HIV and cancer, anti-cancer treatments. They are model organisms for studying how nervous systems have developed, and they have very small brains, but what's unique about their brains is that they have large individual nerve cells, so that you can stimulate a single cell with a microelectrode, and then you can see how those different neurons and ganglia are connected, and how they function in a relatively simple brain. And that has produced a lot of understanding of how more complex brains like ours function. So biomedically, they're really important. They're important indicators of ecosystem health, as I already mentioned, and of climate change. And they have been some of the early sentinels along the California coast, where we've seen change, where in the lower right-hand corner on that slide, you can see a species called Phydiana hiltoni that extended its range. It was only known from the southern end of Monterey Bay was its southern limit until 1994, and then it started spreading northward, and now is found up into Sonoma County.
Wow.
And when it first extends its range, it preys on other nudibranchs, and it has really reduced the population numbers of a lot of other native nudibranchs, and it takes a while for that to stabilize. So some of these sentinels of climate change also have at least profound temporary impacts in local ecosystems.
So again, the reason for these long-term monitoring studies and the museum collections that give you some indication about who did live here, and any collection notes or observations about the circumstances that they were abundant or they're rare or whatever, so you can calculate change over time.
Yes,
Otherwise,
exactly.
every
That's
day,
really
like, you think it's
A
always
key factor in, why they're important to study them. And it's not,
use that.
they're not just another pretty face, but they do have some really important messages about how the world is changing.
Here's
And
the pretty face.
the non-nudibranch in this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Terry looking out to sea there. So the repository for marine biodiversity.
Yeah, and coral reefs are such a small fraction of the world's oceans, and yet they contain more than a quarter of the world's marine biodiversity. And so, biodiversity is not just randomly distributed evenly, and there are certain areas that are really foci of that diversity, and where there has been a lot of speciation and elaboration of species, and their interactions are far more complex in coral reefs. And that's one of the reasons that we spend so much time studying coral reefs, and also the fact that they're so highly threatened with climate change and ocean acidification.
Yeah.
And the diversity is not just at the splintery ends of diversity called species. When you look at a picture like this, you think, how many phyla are there? How many of these big wedges of life
Yes.
compared to what you would find on the land? Because they're about half of the known big categories of life occur only in the ocean, nowhere at all.
Exactly.
And like in no terrestrial or aquatic freshwater echinoderms. Well, there may be some hanging out there somewhere that we haven't discovered
found
yet,
yet.
but
Yeah.
the ocean is where the action is.
And the
Yeah,
really,
and it's where most of the original diversification of the major groups of life occurred. And as you said, some of them are still only unique to marine ecosystems.
what's really, I think, really interesting on some of these reefs is that how they change kind of just even day to night as you get animals that normally live below typical, reef depths. They kind of come up in the evening. So you see this big change of things even day to night.
Absolutely. And that's why studying these things and the other aspect that I wanted to mention is that, we think of tropical reef systems as being relatively stable ecosystems in terms of temperature, in terms of salinity, in terms that they lack, seasonality, but we see huge fluctuations in the constituent species. There's boom and bust in all of that. And there's some constants, but there's also this huge interplay and interaction of species coming in and taking opportunities of that arise, and then they'll disappear for years on end. Many of the nudibranchs that I've seen in the Philippines, I may have seen one or two individuals in 30 years of studying the place. And, that's one of the things that makes it tremendously exciting and very different from a lot of places where you can pretty much understand the total diversity in a very short period of time.
We kind of experienced that when we actually did an art installation down at Catalina Island. We put in the underwater pavilions for Doug Aiken and Parlay, and when we put those big structures in there, some had textured surfaces, part were mirrored, and before very long, these nudibranchs showed up that the dive masters said they hadn't seen in decades, but they were all over the pavilions.
Yeah.
Habitat.
It was like and where they came from and how they just showed up and then just started to proliferate on this temporary structure was really interesting.
And then when you had to take the structure out, you had to go remove all.
Oh yeah, they were like, oh, save the nudibranchs. We were just like moving them,
Yeah.
trying to take them down and try to figure out like where to put them, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and what happens to them once that opportunity disappears? They're still there, but
Yeah.
you just don't see them for a long period of time.
Yeah, they're stealthy. But the
there we
coral
go.
triangle, what an amazing space this is.
Yeah, this is sort of the crux of what I've been doing for the last 40 years is really trying to understand where are the most diverse reefs in the world. And we know they're in this coral triangle that basically includes the Philippines, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and other people extend it a little bit farther, but this is sort of the heart of marine biodiversity in terms of shallow water diversity anyway.
Mhm. And as you all the time you've been there at the Academy of Sciences, you've really been working on like trying to figure out how to display something or get a sense of this in a captive situation. And it's a tough thing to do. I mean, back in the old days at the old Steinhardt Aquarium, we had very dedicated water systems of, you know, fresh or, you know, fresh, cold, fresh, hot. And then the ones that kept in the saltwater systems, they always had like copper sulfate or something added to them to keep the fish healthy. But you couldn't do that with the invertebrates, you know, it was like this whole nother level.
Yeah, and you know, and I think we attempt, you know, with our Philippine Coral Reef exhibit and several of our larger exhibits, we've been able to display at least a representation of what those ecosystems really look like. But it's, I was actually talking to some people who are going with me to the Philippines and explaining that, you know, we probably, if we look at the reef fish in our Philippine Coral Reef exhibit, there's probably about 10% of the total number of species that are found actually in the Philippines. And while all of them are found in the Philippines, it's still merely a representation of what that ecosystem actually looks like.
A snapshot.
Yeah. But it's important because we need people to
Absolutely
have some place that they can kind of get a sense of what it's like to spark the curiosity and the care.
Yeah, and you know, most people don't have the luxury of traveling to a real coral reef, and this is really an important representation of what opportunities and what unique attributes ecosystems like this have. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is understand that coral triangle diversity, and using the same number of dives in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, you can see that the species that we observed in the Philippines is almost twice the rate of accumulation than in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And before I went to the Philippines, I spent a lot of time in Papua New Guinea. And, you know, I thought that was just an incredible place, which it is. But once I got to the Philippines, it was like exponentially mind-boggling and exciting in terms of the overwhelming diversity that I observed.
It's incredible.
And basically, you know, we've been studying several coral reefs around the Philippines, but particularly in these reefs south of Manila, just 2 hours drive on the Verde Island Passage, which separates Luzon Island from Mindoro. And this has an area that we think has, at least based on the nudibranchs, has the greatest biodiversity. And so one of the questions we had is, how does that compare with other groups of organisms? And if you go to the next slide, I believe, yeah, my colleagues, ichthyologists Kent Carpenter and Vic Springer, did a paper where they looked at shallow water fish diversity in reefs within the Coral Triangle. And they found that exactly the same place, the Verde Island Passage, that separates Luzon from Mindoro, had the richest shorefish fauna in the world. And so we were able to leverage this to explore it further, and brought a whole team of systematic specialists with funding from the National Science Foundation over 3 years to find if that was true of other groups of marine organisms. And it was true for the octocorals, it was true for the echinoderms, it was true for every group that we looked at. And we even had a phycologist come along, Sylvia, so we're well represented.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think what this slide, why I have a graph in there, is it really shows you how you, Sylvia, you were saying is you really need to study these things over time, and you can't grasp what that diversity looks like. If you took just the year of 1992, when we first started, we found about 200 species of nudibranchs, which was pretty phenomenal. And, you know, you can see that continuing till we last measured with a major survey in 2017, that species diversity curve is still going up. So we haven't found everything. And as I mentioned, more than half of these species have not been documented by scientists. And on average, even after doing this for 30 years, on average, we find one unnamed species per dive.
Per dive, wow.
And, you know, it's always tremendously exciting, even after making 6,000 dives, that you know you're going to find something that you've never seen before anytime you put on your mask and flippers and jump into the water. And
That's absolutely true. And we, you know, we see that all the time. You know, why should we care about the ocean, or why should we explore the ocean? We could explore space instead. but every single dive, you see something really new and incredible, and it's just full of life.
As I said, with the census of marine life, the deeper you go, the less we know, but the more new discoveries we find. And Richard Pyle, going down to just like 100 meters.
Yes.
You're talking about more like 30 meters for where most of the observations are made. He finds on the order of 13 new species of fish per hour.
Yeah.
I mean,
and we've, you know, the Academy has a really dedicated group of mesophotic divers that are exploring these areas. And Richard's been on a lot of those expeditions, and you know, it's a whole new world. But we, you know, we found 4 new species of fish in shallow water too. So you know, it's endless. And this just sort of shows you one genus of nudibranchs that feeds on other nudibranchs. And the one on the upper left feeds on the fleshy tissue of gobies, shallow water gobies, and just nibbles along the fin spines and eats the soft tissue, and then moves on to another fish.
Wow. It's even worse than a cookie cutter shark.
Yeah.
Vampiricious.
And then the bottom sequence is 2 individuals of the same species that mated, and then after they mate, the larger of the 2 consumes the smaller one.
Yeah.
That's efficiency for you.
That's gratitude for you, huh?
Yeah.
And so this shows you not only is there diversity in species, but they're doing different things in those ecosystems, and they're very specialized predators, and that accounts for a lot of the diversity.
And it really points to really the need to have that luxury of time in the water, to study these things and see them. You know, as you always point out that, you know, Jane Goodall and her little forest blind could really meticulously study the interactions with these chimpanzees,
species,
one
and
species, and really,
within a system, yeah.
really drill down on those animals just because of those long spans
Day
of
and night,
time.
day and night.
Yeah,
But we're so constrained when we're exploring the ocean that it could just be like, how long can you be out in the sun snorkeling, or how much
How
air is
long
in your tank, and
how long can you hold your breath?
yeah, these are these sorts of constraints that we have. I mean, even with a submersible, maybe we have 8 hours or typically in a dive, but
yeah.
but still, the more time you spend out there, the more eyes and observations, the better we know an area.
Right, harnessing the diver power of divers.
Remain curious.
Yeah, always.
And
Whoa.
the next slide is, shows you the evolutionary tree of this genus. And there have been 17 species that have been formally recognized by scientists, and we found 65 in this analysis. So 81% of this genus is unknown by scientists, and that's sort of like the extreme that we've seen and it's just remarkable how diverse some of these groups are.
Absolutely.
But everyone has a place.
Yeah.
Remarkable thing, like your giant computer.
And these were some of those new species that are marked on that tree in yellow that we just found from 2 night dives at one locality. And so there were 7 new species just from those 2 dives.
They were hiding before.
Well,
But
yeah, and they're nocturnal, so they're out scrounging. So you have to get up on their schedule rather than your own.
The other thing is you're looking at the distribution of scientists, because there are a lot of places that scientists have never even looked.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you think about everything that goes into sort of getting ready to do any sort of major expedition. It's the planning, the permits, all the stuff that all the local officials, everybody has to buy in. It's the ship.
That's right. And
it's a big deal.
And it's so important to get that local buy-in. It's not, it's not a tedious chore. It's doing things the right way
Absolutely.
and making sure that you are giving back to the host countries where you're working and that they derive some benefit from that interaction. And that's one of the things that, working in a place like the Philippines, that we've really tried to make those connections, to build those relationships, to train students from those host countries and provide local training to help communities understand the challenges they're facing in terms of preserving their reefs. And it's just astounding that those relationships are the most powerful relationships we have in our professional careers, connecting with local people and helping provide the information that they need to answer the questions that they feel they need to know, not what you think they need to know.
Right.
Exactly.
And spending a lot of time just having conversations and listening.
And it's really been kind of the focus of, when you started the whole Hope Spot initiative, it's kind of that grassroots thing where the people local to the community kind of shout out about a spot, that matters to them. They nominate a spot. And then, with the scientific community, when you go to a place, exactly that, you don't want to come in and just like snatch up a bunch of specimens and whisk them away and leave, you want to really be.
And, in places like the Philippines, that sort of post-colonial science is called parachute scientists, because they drop in and then they disappear. And that's no longer a viable model for how we work around the world. We need to give back to people, to share information, to willingly provide things that are going to be useful. And scientists have a tradition of talking to other scientists and delivering their messages. And this better than anybody, Sylvia. that we need to craft messages to the audience, to other audiences, and that, you know, having this trickle down scientific information that then eventually gets translated in some usable fashion is not the way that we're going to solve the world's problems, nor do we have time for that lecture any longer. We have to accelerate that process, connect directly with people and users of information, and provide it to them in a way that is accessible and digestible.
Mhm.
Share the view and do a lot of listening as well.
Yeah,
People who are in, on, around the water all the time see things, know things. If you just put the questions to them, sometimes the scientists learn from the people as much as from the ocean.
That's
Indirectly.
absolutely. That's how they really realized how many whale sharks were coming into a Holbach,
Right.
right?
Ask the fisherman.
Ask the fisherman. It was like the domino sharks were seen here by my father's father, you know. Like, what is
yes,
a domino shark exactly? And oh, it's a whale shark, you know.
Those big speckled creatures.
yeah. And you know, the exciting news is that in a lot of places, those things that haven't been seen in decades in the Philippines are coming back. The whale sharks, the mola molas, I saw a sperm whale when we were
Wow.
crossing across the Verde Island Passage. I mean, there are so many hopeful signs, and I want to make sure that I have time to really talk about, you know, the hopeful signs that I've seen in my 30 years in the Philippines. When I first went there, there was dynamite fishing. I remember being underwater and hearing an explosion that I thought had blown out my eardrums. And that was
awful feeling. This is
it's a
terrible.
horrible feeling. And I immediately came up to the surface, and there was no other boat around. So this was a concussion wave that had traveled literally miles underwater and was killing fish right there in that community. And that doesn't exist anymore. And we've seen heroic community members basically saying, we're going to stop this. We're going to set aside this reef. It's overfished. And within 5 or 6 years, despite the resistance and threats that some of those heroic community members, mostly women, I might add, are the defenders of those reefs, and they are coming back. And many of the reefs that I've been diving on in the Philippines are in better shape today than they were 30 years ago. And that's what keeps me going. And not only are these reefs the most diverse reefs in the world, but they also show a natural resilience. And we've seen coral bleaching where the corals really had lost all their zooxanthellae. They looked horrible. And we came back 6 weeks later and they were beginning to get their color back. And within 3 months, you wouldn't have even noticed that this event had occurred. There was no mortality. So some areas like this part of the Philippines have natural resistance and resilience, and because they've lived in conditions where there's great fluctuation in temperature, and the corals and their symbionts have adapted to those circumstances. So that's a tremendously hopeful sign. And if you have the most diverse reefs and the most resilient reefs in the same place, then those are areas that really require really concerted conservation effort, because you're protecting for two different things simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the really exciting things that I've seen working with communities in the Philippines, is their receptivity to those ideas and their desire to make sure that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren still have the same resources that they have, and that those humans are part of those ecosystems, relatively recent members of those ecosystems. But when a community at the grassroots level tells its government unit that it wants to set aside a new area as a marine protected area, such as this area that we've studied in the Philippines, that's how real conservation and lasting conservation action begins to take place. It's not going to happen top down.
No, not at all. And this is such a wonderful image because it shows that even, you know, like the whole shoreline has not been overdeveloped, and there's really care and concern for keeping the reef in good shape.
Well, there's
Yeah.
sources of renewal for.
And this is a community that gets most of its income. It's shifted from subsistence fishing to low level local ecotourism that's restricted to snorkeling. There's no scuba diving, so no dropping anchors, no being able to kneel on the reef. And this community, because of the monitoring work that they were doing, they discovered an outbreak of crown and thorn starfish and had an early alert to it, so that we could take some measures to basically nip it in its bud. And there was no serious lasting impact of the sort of rampant predation that crown of thorn starfish can have on pristine coral communities. And sort of, you know, realizing that you want some crown of thorn starfish because they're part of that ecosystem and they create enough turnover and resilience in the corals that you want to have them, but you can't have them in these population explosions that really decimate reefs.
Yeah, when they remove the big, you know, triton shells that feed on them, you know, they can just go,
Yeah.
crown of thorns just go like crazy.
And the exciting thing, since this area has been made a marine protected area, we've now seen the tritons coming back.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
Those
so
are wonderful mollusks.
it's really, you know, the kind of place you want to go if you need to have, if you're feeling depressed about the state of the world. This will give you a you know, 5 minutes in the water here and you'll feel pretty good about the world, and even more dedicated to making sure that this spreads to other places and that it becomes a global way of thinking rather than one that's happening in a single community.
Right, that's like a template for resilience.
Yeah.
Well, it's protecting the golden goose. If you kill the goose, you sell the goose, that's it.
Yep.
But if you take care of the goose and the reefs and the fish and the tritons, everybody.
And these are some of the local heroes of that we talk about in our coral reef exhibit, but these are people that I know and have worked with. And the person on the left used to be a dynamite fisherman. He's now planting mangroves in restoring reefs in the Philippines. The woman next to him is an environmental lawyer who sued the Philippine government for not enforcing their own environmental laws and won in the Philippine Supreme Court. The woman next to her is a woman named Princess, who was the defender of her reef and basically got it to become a marine preserve, stopped fishing for more than 6 years, and now this reef is you wouldn't recognize it from what it was. It's a thriving, living ecosystem again with all of the diverse players. And then the two young ladies to the right are two high school students who wanted to do a science fair project on nudibranchs, and one came in third place in the International Science Fair with their project, and are now educators in the Philippines and having their own careers, and all starting with an interest and curiosity in this case in nudibranchs, but it could have been anything.
Yeah, it's to your point, you're always saying, you know, what people say, what can I do? And you often tell people just
look in the
mirror, discover your superpower, you know, whether you're a lawyer or you're a reformed fisherman, you know, whatever it is, or a science fair participant, you know, there's things that everyone can do.
Just do it.
So we have about another 15 minutes or so, and we've got about 7 questions in the queue. Should we go to questions and answers?
Sure.
we'll kind of carry on the
Is there
conversation.
more images?
There are more images, but I can,
Well, it's just,
you want to pop through them?
yeah,
Okay.
just don't.
This is just some of the work we do, and you know, every time we go to a community, we have outreach, work with schools, with teachers, with local leaders, and you know, one of the amazing things about the Philippines is that although it's a coastal nation, only about 10%, 5 to 10% of Filipinos are able to swim, including a lot of fisher folk who go out in their little outriggers far away from land and are very vulnerable. But because they don't swim, the only thing they see about corals are the things that wash up on the beach that look like rocks. And so starting at a very fundamental level of creating an understanding that these are living organisms, that they involve the relationship between algae and a living animal, and how they're dependent on each other, and building that understanding is remarkable. And the other thing, that Filipinos, like everybody, are very proud people, and once you tell them that they have the most diverse reefs on the planet, there's such a pride that develops, and that's, with that pride comes a sense of ownership and responsibility, and to have that grow is really tremendously exciting, and to see that understanding become part of biology curriculum and science curriculum in elementary schools is very rewarding.
That's excellent. And hopefully, you know, encourage people to get out on the water and learn to swim and become kind of water.
And a lot of the community groups we work with are teaching kids how to swim, and having them put on a mask and flippers and get their first look at a completely different world that is right in their backyard, but that is very foreign to them.
I love this. Adios.
So yeah, I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, I'm going to come up here to the questions. Q&A, come on. All right. Susan is asking, do you think nudibranchs might survive more acidic ocean pH than other mollusks because they don't have to build a shell?
Oh, that's a great question. Nudibranchs as larvae do have a shell, and so they still have to go through that acidic ocean bottleneck in their early life history. Some have direct development where they don't have a shell. So I would say that they are those particular species, which is really only a small fraction that don't have a life in the plankton, would be less vulnerable under acidic conditions.
Winners and losers. So, yeah, good question. Adapt and overcome.
Adapt and overcome, exactly. Judy is asking, what is the size range of nudibranchs?
Oh, that's a good question. One I should have mentioned. They range from maybe 2 or 3 millimeters as fully adults, you know, so
Yeah.
tiny to 1.5 to 2 feet in length. Like the giant Spanish dancer nudibranch, or some of the giant sea hares that we have off the California coast.
Those sea hares are amazing. That's why I have my purple sweater on today, because I got inked by a sea hare. As a volunteer at the Academy of Sciences, I was trying to rescue him off of a drain, overflow drain, and he got scared and he's like, I inked. So I thought it was really interesting that, you know, octopus aren't the only, and squid aren't the only animals that can ink. You know?
Yeah.
And
And
purple.
purple is a lot prettier than sepia.
Yeah. I was kind of like, my hands stayed purple for days, you know, it's terrible.
Yeah.
So Stephanie says, as far as brilliant colors, do nudibranchs vary between colder and warmer waters? Meaning, are the colors brighter in the more tropical areas and less colorful in warmer and colder?
Another really great question. There are a lot of temperate nudibranchs, and all you have to do is look to the tide pools of California that are brilliantly colored. So it can be something that you find in cold water and in warm water. But what is a fundamental difference is that as you go in deeper water, you tend to find nudibranchs that are all white or a combination of white and black, and because all of the colors disappear. And so one of the things we find in the deep sea and in mesophotic depths is that you have a lot of species that have contrasting white and black coloration that is essentially warning coloration at depth, where you don't have the colors. You should have the contrasting white and black, which still can be that kind of warning coloration, but in a different world where color is no longer relevant.
There's some that are kind of the color of my jacket, but
Yes.
water that is only when looks red when you turn the light on.
Yeah.
That in the
That's
natural
right.
condition doesn't look red, to us at least.
Yeah.
Perception of color is such, it's different. Different creatures have different ways of seeing color. So what we see
Yeah.
is not necessarily what those other guys are seeing.
And the really fascinating thing about nudibranchs is they don't have image forming eyes. They only detect light and dark. So they can't detect all of their beauty, which is,
Seems
kind of sad.
Yeah. Do any of them have any bioluminescent properties?
They do. Yeah. A lot of species that are found in the plankton community, there's some planktonic nudibranchs, and a lot of them are bioluminescent. But there's some that are found on shallow water reefs that are bioluminescent as well.
It'd be kind of cool to see those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Little fireflies.
Yeah. Kathleen is asking, why is the biodiversity so expansive in the Coral Triangle compared to other areas?
Whoa.
That's a lot of people ask that question, including a lot of scientists, and we don't really know the answer fully as of yet. But some of the things that we speculate on is that it's an area that has been present for a long period geologically. There's been a lot of time for evolution to take place. There has been a lot of changes due to sea level changes that have created paths for isolation, which allows species to separate, and then the water comes back and they're intermixed. So you have the accumulation of a lot of species. The Philippines, for example, is an area where you have a mixing of species that are found to the north up into Japan, Okinawa and parts of Japan, and also the deep tropic species, and they can coexist in that area. And we talked about some of the ability to withstand changes in water temperature. And so you have a mixing of biotas. And so it's a combination of different things, and but a lot of it really relates to Earth's history and geology and changes in ocean currents and sea level.
The Atlantic Ocean is young by comparison to the
Exactly.
Pacific.
Yeah.
So, and the Indian Ocean is somewhere in between.
Hannah is asking, how do you know when a species you see in the wild is undescribed? Do you collect them as samples?
Yes, and yes. So how do you know they're well, fortunately, nudibranchs generally have very distinctive color patterns that different species have different color patterns. So 90% of the time, by looking at them, I can tell you if it's something that is new or not new, because I know the ones,
Here.
it's like going into a party and you look around the room and you go, I know that person and I don't know that person. And it's the same kind of visual recognition.
Right.
And but
your
one of the things that we're
Library
finding,
you keep here.
yeah. But one of the things is that there are cryptic species as well that are not as easy to recognize. And so we have to rely on genetic tools and small morphological differences and combining those different lines of evidence sometimes to look at some of the diversity that's out there. And I would say that with the advent of being able to sequence DNA, that we have learned that there are many more species than we thought there were in terms of their genetic distinctions. And then when you look at them more carefully, given those little hints from their genetics, sure enough, you find there are differences that you can recognize.
Like there's look-alike species, one predatory, the other, well, it's not.
Yeah.
Predator prey mimicry. Yeah.
But you know, it's a new world. Not everybody carries around with them the knowledge and expertise that you have. But somebody who wants to know, they're newcomers, there are new systems that you can go online actually and see an inventory of the known species. It's at least a starting place to say, well,
Yeah, we have
anything
so
here
many
that-
more tools
Yeah.
at our disposal. You know, we have identification tools where anybody can post a picture on iNaturalist, and a community of people come together and come to a consensus about what that is, and people learn through that experience and gain that expertise and share that knowledge. And it's, you know, that's one of the reasons I write field guides, is to make these tools accessible to people in the places where I work, and to spark that interest, and that everybody can be a taxonomist and an identifier of species.
Explore. All right. So we only have a few minutes left. We have a lot more questions.
10 questions. Oh my gosh.
Pressure is on.
Okay, I'll be fast.
What is known about the nudibranchs in South Florida? Al wants to know.
Al, there's quite a bit known, and people are finding new things in Florida all the time. You know, there's some real hotbeds of discovery where people are looking, and you can see a lot of those things posted online, Facebook, and their nudibranch Facebook groups. So have a look and you can find out a lot more about what's going on in Florida.
Awesome. And Gabby, how do scientists find and study nudibranchs that live deeper than scuba limits?
Well, we have great tools, and we're extending what are scuba limits with rebreather mixed gas diving. We have ROVs, we have submersibles, we have people like Sylvia going down to amazing depths and really exploring those areas. And there's so, you know, most of the ocean is unknown and ripe for exploration.
Go. Paul is asking, do any of your books cover the nudibranchs of the Bahamas?
Mine don't, but there is one on the there is a book on the nudibranchs of the Caribbean. 2 books that I know of, in fact, and I'm sure you can find them online.
David asks, what is the main driver or obstacle scientifically to ID a species beyond genus level and assign it a name?
Well,
That's
I
a
would
big
say that's a good question. I'll try and answer it quickly. Basically, we need new genetic markers to really delve into the deeper level evolutionary relationships beyond the genus and family level.
Okay. Jean is asking, I'm going to save the one from Jennifer last. Jean is asking, have you trained academic nudibranch experts in the Philippines?
Yes,
That's a fast answer.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Victoria, I was just asking the same question. Have you ever heard a nudibranch make a noise?
No.
Okay. And
Need
finally,
Bigger ears.
it's
They
top of the
probably
hour,
do.
top of the hour question. Jana wants to know, what is your favorite nudie and why?
Whoa.
Ooh. This is going to sound evasive, but it changes weekly. I always have a favorite, but it's whatever. I just saw one that someone posted online from Madagascar, and it's my favorite this week.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're going to have you come back again and
Great. Be happy to do that. Thanks so much.
And before we go, we'd like to say, again, thank you, Terry, and thank you, Ocean Elders, and thank you to the whole community of dive in people that keep showing up for these conversations. Water connects us all, and we're so grateful to everyone. We're going to be working to squeeze in one more episode before the new year. And until then, remember that
We need to take care of the ocean
as if our life depends on it.
because they do.
It does.
Thanks for making this so much fun.
Thank you. So
Okay.
grateful.
Okay.
Until next time. Bye.